Are we flagging by now? Sugar kicked in from lunch? Actually, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, Emily, for asking me along today. And it's a pleasure to come along. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I always feel frustration at these sorts of things because I have an enormous amount to say. People that know me, I probably have too much to say. And I've very little time to say. But one of the things about my... I'm naughty with PowerPoint, so I always put too many slides up there, but they're actually a summary of... You can read them through, and they actually summarise what I have to say. And I won't use all of those slides. And I know somebody in front of me has been using the slides very carefully, and I'll try and look after you because I can skip around from slide to slide. But I'll try and look after you in relation to that. I just wanted to follow up with it. I mean, it's been a fantastic program. And I just wanted to comment on some of the things I've heard today. It was wonderful to hear from Mark this morning. And one of the things that really struck me was something that's very... He essentially said, catch up with your tribe. Catch up with the people that share your life experience. And that sort of inclusion, actually, Alicia referred to that too as well. I actually said many years ago at a Blind Citizens Association meeting, you know, we have all of these human rights, but I've never heard the right of people to actually, the right to meet other people that share your disability or impairment. And I think it is a right. It's not just desirable, it's something that you must do. And we see that with our students. We run a program called Support Skills, where we bring students in with vision impairment. It goes every Friday of school term. Kids can come twice or once a term, depending on the level of disability, and they can actually meet other kids with vision impairment. And actually, it does them no end of good, actually, to actually meet their peers and see people that are the same as themselves, better than themselves, worse than themselves, and actually share that experience. So that from Mark, it was interesting listening to Lisa. I know Lisa, and she was talking about, she happened to mention Labour's congenital amaurosis. I've had a lot to do with it, with Labour's kids. I know all of them. I know all the vision impaired kids in Victoria because I come across them, but I know a lot of Labour's kids very well, and they are born very vision impaired and blind. They're actually a very, very highly achieving bunch of kids. One of our students got 99.8 in VCE a few years ago. And I know about these things that are coming along for Labour's to actually cure the condition, and I've asked many of them whether they would take the cure, and every one of them have said, absolutely not. I'm very comfortable the way I am. I am a blind person. I like who I am. I like my life, and I don't want it to change. It's interesting if you happen to lose vision later on. I was blown away by Klaus's talk and a couple of things. And actually, he ended up with a quote from Helen Keller. Although the world is full of suffering, it is full of the overcoming of it, which could be what my talk's about, and you'll see a little bit about that later on. But he's sort of getting the knowledge early and about opportunity. Actually, Katie just after that talked about opportunity as well. I know this sounds weird, but in our business there's lots of... One thing about getting a hearing impairment and getting an early diagnosis of Usher is that you're starting to look at that vision impairment early. And the earlier you know about something, the more easily you can prepare. And Klaus actually said, you know, he actually summed up my experience with a lot of adolescents who are older when this vision impairment hits them out of the blue. It can be really, really devastating, particularly in teenage years when the last thing you want to be is different. And actually, that's one of the big issues of coming to terms with any grief, any disability, any problem. I have a walking stick today. Next Wednesday, I'm having a hip replacement. I was at one of our, and I've not been using my walking stick very often, though I should, because I've almost fallen over a number of times and I get very sore. And I was at a support skills one day and I was talking to a group of kids. And actually there were 3 kids in that group I know are hassled by orientation mobility people to use their long white canes, and they don't. And I said to these kids, I'm about to have a hip replacement and I haven't been using my cane when I should. Why do you think I don't? And one of them looked at me and I said, you don't want to look old and disabled. And I said, absolutely. I have feet of clay like everybody else. I don't want to look old and disabled. It's really hard when, you know, grief can happen to anybody. Loss, grief, dealing with grief, being challenged by that is something we can deal with. You think you're going very fine, you get to 65 like I am, and then things start to hit you. And it was really great to hear Katie say, because she talked about opportunity. And she obviously comes from a particular way of dealing with things within her family. Her sister said to her, well, get on with it. You knew it was going to happen anyway. So there was a style of dealing with things. But what Katie did, she looked at her situation. Here is an opportunity. And this is one of the issues about dealing with loss and difficulty. How do I get meaning in my life? So let's move on. I just want to quickly pick a couple of the acronyms we use. But I just want to write out. First thing, bottom line, I haven't seen many kids with RP in my job. Why? Well, VI is rare in children, as Susan said this morning. We only deal, actually it's a bit more than that. We're getting up to, with the rise of population in Victoria, we're dealing with probably about 600 vision impaired kids now. We've had actually about 16 blind students, braille using students start in the last 2 years, so it's going up. It's in Victoria. Most students with RP are not in the VI range during their school years. They actually, often they can read normal size print, and that's really one of the biggest issues educationally is your print access. The kids who have the most problem who lose vision are the exact reverse of RP, our early onset macular degeneration sufferers. Kids who lose their central vision, and really they show up really quickly because even though they can read, they probably can only read for 5 to 10 minutes without getting totally exhausted. So we don't, the tabletop vision, the educational access vision of RP usually even for quite significantly affected, even kids that are in the legally blind range, in other words, they've got less than 10 degrees of field, it's usually pretty good. So the other thing is, they hide it. They really do. And often they don't want to have anything to do with us. Even some of the worst affected kids who suffer from XLinked RP, which is the most rapidly advancing RP, get to about 12 or 13 or 15 boys, of course, XLinked, they get through the mother, and their vision really goes off very quickly. And very often, they don't want anything to do with us, or canes, or technology, or anything. In fact, I have seen kids with RP get through to year 11 and 12, where it was a boy down Frankston Way, he got through to year 11, and he hit it. He had friends that helped him out. Even had a girl in a family where there was VI in the family, and she got through to year 12 hiding her RP as well. So you can get away with it. And so it raises one of the most important issues. Those who can pass as non-disabled, or non-VI or whatever, will try and do it as long as they possibly can. Me with my cane. It's a very human thing to do. And I think the desire is quite normal and quite seductive. In fact, if I see a kid with a white cane and they don't need it, or they're showing themselves to be more vision impaired than they apparently are, I really start to ask questions. And that's not usual. That's usual. That's quite odd. Okay. About 12 years ago, I was asked to go and talk to guide dogs, 12, 13 years ago, about retinitis pigmentosa. And I turned up, I did a lot of reading, and actually one of the articles that I referred to, which is a fantastic article about coping with suffering and coping with RP, it's in this and you can actually pull it up online and I encourage you to read it, but only 2 families turned up that day. There was family A, Mum and her son looking really stressed and distressed. And as I was sitting here this morning, I remember they were seated right at the back of the room. The vision of the room just struck me. And they were sitting right at the back, and they were really stressed. Their bodies were hunched over. Dad didn't come because he was too distressed about the whole situation and finding out information. Grief. And he didn't come. And everybody in the family was suffering. Why me? Why my child? Why me? My family? There's no hope. And then was family B. And I just remembered, they were right up the front. Dad was there, Mum was there, the child was there. His brother was there, because this was an X-linked one, and so it was starting to manifest early. And it had occurred at other parts in the family, so they were familiar with it. And this is absolutely, I can't remember the exact words, but the boy who was about 8 or 9 came up and he said, I know I'm going to lose my vision, but when I do, I want to have all the skills to have a good life. And they wanted as much information as possible, and they wanted to really immerse themselves in this issue. They had found meaning in the situation. They'd found opportunity. They'd found that, you know, probably what was at the back of that, yes, I'm going to lose my vision, but it doesn't mean I can't have a wonderful life and I can't do lots of great things and all of that sort of stuff. Actually, you often see that, you know, even though it's dramatic, but we have certain conditions where people lose their vision really rapidly. They'll be normal 1 month and lost almost all their vision the next month, and it's terrible. But it's really interesting, in a strange way, they seem to cope better and get on with things because, well, here I am, get on with it. It's this stuff where you have got a sword of Damocles hanging over your head. I remember there was a kid many years ago that I never got to see in the school. He never appeared at the vision assessment clinic, but he had RP. And I spoke to the welfare coordinator of the school and I said, I think I'd love to see this kid. I know all about vision. And he said, well, he's basically not coming to school. And I said, why? And he said, this is what he said to me. What's the point of coming to school? What's the point of an education? I'm just going to go blind anyway. And I never got to see him. Never got to see him. I hope he's okay. So family B, they were distressed, but and they didn't like it. It wasn't a good thing. But I can't change RP, but I can change the way I deal with it. I can change my response. And I'm going to take on a little journey somewhere different, because I tend to... Has anybody ever heard of DeFranco? If you want, everybody should read his book, Man's Search for Meaning. Everybody, because you never know when suffering's going to get you. But if you're dealing with a disability, particularly a degenerative one, it's really important to read Victor's book. He wrote it in 1946 after he'd spent from 1942 to 1945 in 3 different concentration camps, the last one being Auschwitz. All his family died, he was tortured, he was starved, he was cold, and he survived. And what he found, and he wrote his book on the basis of that, and he published Man's Search for Meaning in 1946, and he found there were 2 types of prisoners. Those who'd lost, should have included faith, meaning and hope in the future. And he said, you know, you just died anyway. There's some things you could have died. You had apparently, according to his statistics, a 1 in 29 chance of dying. But those people who'd lost faith and meaning and hope were much more likely to die. In fact, a lot of people, according to the book, committed suicide in the camp. And those who didn't, they looked at life as a challenge to overcome, and that's what Victor was like. He actually said, here's a real opportunity. He was a psychiatrist and a neurologist. Here's a real opportunity to learn something about the way people cope. You talk about opportunity. And so what he found, and this is the base of his approach to therapy, he developed a thing called logotherapy, which is one of the cognitive behavioural therapies that we use today. Much of modern psychology is based on cognitive behavioural therapies, which are basically about you can't change the world, but you can change the way you deal with it. And so, an important part is this finding meaning in your suffering. In life, you can make a victor of your experience, or you can ignore the challenge and fade away, or at least live a sad, depressed life. Katie, this morning, she found opportunity. It was perfect. I thought, I love you. Lead right into my discussion. Or you can ask yourself, do I have a strong why in my life, or why strong enough to get me through the challenge? You can define it, clearly see it, you can overcome any challenge. And Frankel looked at the situation he saw it as an opportunity to learn and cope. So you find, and Friedrich Nietzsche sums it up, he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. And the second thing is about freedom of choice. And what Frankel realised, that you always have a choice. I was talking to a student about this. Well, what if you're in a bank and somebody holds a gun to your head and says, give me the money or I'll blow your brains? I said, well, you do have a choice. Narrow choice, admit it, but it's still a choice. But when we no longer, and Viktor Frankl, if you want to go on YouTube, there's lots of, and he says, but by all means, change the world if you can, make it better. But when we're dealing with something we can't change, and RPE is something, if it's coming, you can't change, we have to change, we're challenged to change ourselves. And he says everything can be taken from man and woman, but one thing, the last human freedom is to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And that's the message. If you forget about everything I say today, is that freedom of choice. And you can get help with that. A lot of people come to me and say, Geoff, you know about vision impairment, disability. I need to you as a counsellor. Good psychologists deal with these sorts of, that's what good psychology is all about. A good psychologist, 90% of what they do is listen to you. Listen and say to that person, tell me about yourself. I want to understand what it is like for you. That's 90% of what you do with people. Listen. Tell me, I want to understand. And you spend a lot of time checking it out. And then you can help with people with the way they respond. Because really, any psychologist is dealing with this issue. Person comes in to see you, I can't cope, life is terrible, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, but I want the world, I want to stay the same and I want the world to change. What you've got to do with them as a psychologist is to get to that point where they're accepting the only thing you have power over is to change yourself and your response to your situation. So look, you know, it appears in lots of things. Confucius, Buddha, Shakespeare, but the Greek philosopher Epictetus says it's not what happens to you, it's so important, it's how you react that matters. So if you're interested in, you know, really there's lots of psychology that's about cognitive behavioural therapy is the current dominant form of psychotherapy. A lot of people go and see psychologists, unfortunately, when things are absolutely disastrous. I have to say to people, if you've got anxiety and that sort of, get there early. Get there early, because it ain't going to get better. If you've got anxiety problems, you're not going to get better of its own accord. Get there early, learn some skills, do something about it. So have a look. There's lots of, and the Australian Psychological Society has a very good, nice search engine if you want to find well-qualified psychologists in your area. Go for a clinic, get a mental health plan through your GP, and get off and see people. And they don't have to be expert about vision or hearing problems. They're there. If they're good people, they will listen and attempt to understand your experience. That's what it's about. The great thing about learning, about making a choice, I mean, if you don't learn to control your response to things, you end up with two problems. Your original problem and the fact you're upset about it. So get some help about that sort of thing. Well, let's move on to, so you can see where we're heading as far as independence and that. I mean, it's lovely to hear Alicia come along and I mean, I should have mentioned about honing. There's very few occupations, and I said this to Alicia before, there's very few occupations we can say to the person who does it, there is not one thing about the job you do that isn't worthwhile. O&M training is just absolutely fantastic, and what it gives people is independent movement. And independent movement plugs into your social connectedness, plugs into you getting a job, plugs into the fact that you're feeling in charge of things. It's really the bee's knees about independence. Now this is the article I mentioned, and I pull it up. It's really interesting because I came across, I'd actually not long before read Viktor Frankl's book. It's How Patients Experience Progressive Loss of Vision, RP, a model of adjustment using qualitative methods. You think, oh, this is a drive. But it's actually a really good, interesting article to read. And what they say in the article, adjusting to RP inevitably entails a certain degree of suffering. Suffering can be defined as a state of distress that occurs when a person's integrity or life is threatened, disrupted, or burdened. It lasts until integrity is restored either by eliminating the threat or adjusting to it. Adjusting. It is not the physical impairment themselves, and that's the issue with RP. It's not like my hip. My hip involves incapacity and a whole lot of pain. But RP in itself is not painful, but what it does to you, what it stops you from doing is pain. but the impact of the physical state on the person as a whole that causes suffering, and this has been referred to as existential suffering. And so, and what they're going to say, our data suggests the process of adjusting to RP is a dynamic one composed of a series of interrelated steps. The search for meaning involves understanding why a disability has occurred. Mastery centres around gaining control of the implications in order to management, changing the way you operate in relation to it. And self-esteem reflects the effort to regain a positive view of oneself in a new life situation. So they found that Group A, they hung on to being sighted people. In the article it talks about a guy who's driving his car around and he keeps his white cane under the dashboard. I've seen a number of people that have been driving. There's one particular person I met who was still driving, and for her to see your hand shake, you'd have to hold it literally at her chin level, which tends to suggest that she was well and truly in the legally blind range. So, oh, but I drive on bright sunny days. They conceal their RP. They avoid using assistive devices. White canes, if a person is willing to get out there with a white cane and use it, you know they're doing okay. You know? Because Alicia will tell you this, editor guide does people, the number of kids that should be using white canes and don't use them, or adults that should be using them and don't use them, is quite amazing. Personally, I mean, see, they can fall flat on their face if they like. I mean, break your teeth, it's up to you. But it leads to dependence. That's the sad thing. You become dependent on others. You don't become independent. And the Group B self-identified. I'm vision impaired. I use a white cane. I'm cool about it. You know? And actually, the other thing, they actually look for their tribe. One of the difficult things is to get that Group A people to actually engage with their tribe. They say, I don't want to go with vision impaired and that's hearing impaired. Oh, God. They've got the plague or something. And they use assistive device, and they're independent. I work with a colleague, Geordie Hell, who's a music teacher. She's totally blind. She has been quit, but she uses a guide dog, but she's all over the world. She was in Kuala Lumpur on something. She travels everywhere. She's got fantastic O&M skills, and she's completely independent. So, indications of adjustment. General ability to enjoy and get on with life. A willingness to engage with your tribe. The fact that there are Usher's people here, you're engaging with your tribe. You're here. And it's really important. And a need to assertively promote the rights and needs of other VI and disabled people. That's something I've noticed. The people who've really come to terms, they go that next step. I want to make a difference very often about getting involved, such as the people who set up this conference. So, I've only got a little bit more time left. There's this concept, and you can read through my notes about self-determination. Self-determination is basically the ability to get on your life in a really sensible, reasonable manner. So you can read through. The other thing I'd like you to read at the end of my talk, there's a whole section of my ideas on self-advocacy and social skills and getting on with your life with kids. And I tried to adjust it for UsherKids, but I won't have time to go through that. But have a look through it, because I think it's got some good ideas. But with self-determination, you make choices, decisions, and need to exhibit some personal internal control over actions, feel capable and act that way, understand the effects of your own actions. In other words, there's a fancy psychological term called internal locus of control. People with internal locus of control have that view. It's not what happens to me that's so important, it's what I do with what happens to me. So that's basically what self-determination is. And these are some of the things that we, self-advocacy, risk-taking, I love kids to take risks, One vision impaired kid to me, I'm really vision impaired, I live 50 metres away from the school, my mum won't let me walk to school by myself. Is it because I'm vision impaired? And I said, well, it might be, because nobody walks to school anymore. We are so maniacally crazy about the dangers to our children that we don't let them have freedom and engage with life under their own accord. It's outrageous, it's damaging our children, and it's promoted and by our media, particularly our print media, to make that Melbourne is a completely dangerous place, that everybody should be frightened all the time. It's an absolute outrage and it drives me nuts. Gives psychologists a lot of business, though. Got to be something. Okay, so really, this is one of the key things. To assist VI or any disabled student developing self-determination and independence and resilience, we need to learn how to step back and encourage them to do as much as possible for themselves. If I, as an aide, teacher, psychologist, parent, do the right thing, they won't need us anymore. That's your job, to do yourself out of a job. So in a nutshell, this is the thing I keep in the back of my mind with VI students. I know they're okay if I'm dealing with a student, a VI student, a ready student, who's able to ask for help politely and assertively when they really need it, and say no politely and assertively to help they don't need. It's really hard to get them there. So the kid who can say, excuse me, love your class, want to do well, but I can't see what you're doing, this is what I need. Can we talk about this? Or, it's fine, I'm okay, I don't need your help. And actually, the second part is one of the biggest things because people get maniacal about vision impairment. Oh, the poor darlings. We've just got to hold them in our arms and wrap them up and bubble wrap, as Alicia said. And that murders people. It really does. Your job is to do yourself out. We want them by the time they're 18 to be completely independent. We need to be. There's a concept, a little bit later in my notes, there's a lady named Karen Wolf, and I'm coming up to my time. Have a look. Karen has this wonderful audio online about vision impairment. Karen comes to Australia a lot. She's an expert on jobs and people with vision impairment. And what Karen says, always keep your eye on the next environment. What does my child need to function? And really, what your child needs to be able to do by the time they're 16 to 18 is to function completely independently. Because even if you're totally blind and you're going off to uni, you've got to be able to do it yourself. We're running out of time, and I love what Alicia was talking about, doing that sort of stuff as early as possible. So there's a nicely 19 ways to step back. That's Karen Wolf, which I'll just whip through. And the other thing is, cut this crap about the self-esteem movement in America is one of the most dangerous psychological things ever happened in the Western world. Somehow back in the 60s, and that's how long ago, that if we say to people who are having problems, they're wonderful and marvellous, and oh, you're doing great, even though they're not, it's going to somehow, it'll bolster their self-esteem and they'll do better. So we lie to them. And the kid looks at you, what the hell are you talking about? Be honest. Say to kids, you can't do that. You're not doing that well. Let's look at whether you keep on doing it or do we do it a different way? And if you want to see what the outcome of the self-esteem movement in America is, just look at their president. I rest my case. And in America now, they have the highest rates of self-esteem in their schools, amongst their school children, in some of the lowest skill levels. Proper self-concept, evaluation of self, comes from what you do and how you deal with the world. And it comes from parents, teachers, aides being honest with you. Right? So, honest feedback. So that's Karen's thing and some of the things. And look, this is stuff on resilience. There's tons of stuff on resilience. But I like these things from Edith Bradford. I am, I have, I can. The sorts of things that are characteristics for resilience, which you can go through and have a look at. And finally, there's stuff about social skills and self-advocacy. There's lots of things I think about being assertive, saying thank you. I really train our kids up. Every time a teacher or an aide or anybody helps you when you need help or leaves you alone when you don't, thank them. I'll just leave with it. There's a boy, low vision, got almost to lawyers at 20 paces at a school with this boy and his family. And I went along and said, what do you do when a teacher and aide actually helps you and gives you what you need? He said, what do you say to them? So they don't say anything. Buggers should get off their ass and do it more often. I said, oh, that's an interesting point of view. I said, well, you try something. Scientific experiment, give it a go. Next couple of weeks, every time somebody leaves you alone when you don't need help or helps you when you need it, simply say, thank you, I really appreciate it, and say what they've done. I got a call from the principal a week later. I said, oh, what have I done? And he said, what did you do? I said, what do you mean? He said, it's just completely changed. He's just, and he came back to me after 2 weeks, he said, it's amazing, Geoff. Things have just really improved. And I said, of course it does. I mean, because when you give honest thank yous back for that sort of thing, it does make a difference. Teachers and aides are human beings as well, I think. But, so that's something you do. But have a look through some of these, and I've finished. Just want to go to the last one. The last 2 things. When faced with the prejudice, craziness of the world, a good sense of humour and the ability to laugh at yourself in the world can be your best defence and survival tool. And actually, there's another article, there's lots of which talking about dealing with RP. Having a good sense of humour is important about that. And one of the things that Emily and I talked about, possibly be talking about, is a fantastic, did you get permission? Right. I put Emily onto this. Tough Talks, talk to children about sight loss. It's about helping kids deal with retinitis pigmentosa. There isn't anything in that article that it says it much better than I could ever say. So have a look at that and read it through, because it really gives fantastic advice about how to cope with talking to your kids about this loss of vision. And the last thing, get some help if you need it for your kid. Get some help for yourself, because dealing with disability, I've been a psychologist in the department for nearly 40 years. I've sat and stared into the eyes of parents with kids with disability for thousands and thousands of hours of my life. And really, the grief is palpable. And the rotten thing about grief with disability is it's in a sense non-final. When somebody dies, it's a final thing. Death is actually relatively normal, and you do some things and you get on with it. But when a child has a disability, something does die. The child you thought you were going to have dies. And you have to deal with it. And it goes up and down with the stresses in your life. And your grief is manifested in seeing other people. When you go to a birthday party, first birthday party of your child, and you see what the other kids can do and your child can't do. When you're starting school, and when you're walking through the shopping centre, and you see things and you think, this could have been my child, but it's not. And it knocks you around. So use psychologists. They are quite useful. It's got a lot cheaper through mental health plans. Get to your GP, get a mental health plan. Go and see people sooner rather than later. Get with somebody, and if they're no good, try somebody else. Don't give up on refrigerators because you've got a bad one. But there are some great people out there. And actually, some of the psychologists are bulk billing now, so use them. I think it is a useful service if you get somebody, and look after yourself, because in the end, as parents, the best thing you can do for your child is to be a happy, well-adjusted, successful, relatively person. In other words, having a good life for yourself. If you're looking after yourself and you're feeling good yourself, you're good for everybody else in your life. Thank you.